So today I want to talk about Juri Love's book, A Gift from Adversity. And I want to say it's a very powerful, very short memoir. I would even call it a novella memoir because it's around 120 pages and it reads very quickly. Like the first day I read it, I got like 60 pages done. And there's a lot of things that I really want to talk about. You know, personally, I know Juri as a friend. She helped me she helped me out on my short film a few months ago. And she's also been a good mentor and a person with like some really good advice. She also did the 40-hour film project for Boston, and she did a really great job. I did offer her advice, but like she's also somebody that I know is very, self-guided and does awesome things independently. And I'm always happy to be impressed by how she handles adversity and does it very well. Coincidentally, her book is called A Gift from Adversity. And there's a couple of things that I want to say about it that, it really it's really biography about her life and how she's handled really disturbing and fucked up situations. Unfortunately, she was somebody who dealt with abuse from her father, both sexual and very violent abuse. And also, too, when she was 18 years old, she came back to Japan, after achieving a lot of things and was forced by her grandmother, I believe, or her mother, to live in the streets. Like they said, you're 18, you have to figure out your own life and be appreciative. So, she had to do things like one thing that was really sad is that, intentionally sleep with different men just so she can have a place to stay over during the nights. And that's extremely sad. And, it's very horrible people can treat their children like this. And the other thing that I want to say is that reading this book and studying psychology, I do understand that I do feel like that many of the people that have treated Juri bad in her life, they do probably have a form of an abusive narcissism. And I think that, that's very true about her family. Yes, she's somebody successful. Yes, she's a child that of divorce. So, the mother left, but she had to stay with her father. So possibly a lot of abuse and a lot of surprise, you're going to figure out your life on your own kind of came at her because of narcissistic abuse or just she became a bit of a punching bag. And I kind of just, and that is so sad and so horrible. And, it's extremely uncalled for. The other thing is that I've understood about Japanese culture is that, violence against women is not treated as seriously as it should be. And I really think that, in addition to an American release, I would love to see this book translated into Japanese and becoming a very riveting book in the country Japan and really fight against sexual violence and also just, child abuse. I think that, one thing that I love about her book is her ability to have levity because, it is really dark. She does talk about sexual violence that's happened to her. She talks about domestic violence that happened to her mother and herself. And then she also talks about getting thyroid surgery where the doctors were being inappropriate. And she was also half awake in that. And she also talks about, her accomplishments. And I love the first chapter because I think she was talking about receiving an accomplishment for bringing music to Boston, and it was at this big basketball event. And it was really funny because when I read that, I kind of just felt it was a little narcissistic of her or self-indulgent or her celebrating her accomplishments too much. But when you see the backstory of her, it's really somebody with a lot of humility and somebody who has really who's really lived a life of disturbing stuff, being on your own and solving your own problems. And I think that that's kind of one thing that I really can emphasize with is that, there are very intelligent people who are very accomplished or they're struggling to do their damnedest to survive in this world. And then there are people that knock them down, and that could be family members. That can just be, some jealous person who sees them at a music event and punches them in the stomach and punches their friend in the stomach. That could be, people that just randomly sexually harass women or sexually harass guys, because that does happen to guys as well. There are a lot of people that tear down, that try to tear you down because they want you to be a failure as them, or they are scarred by life. But when I read Juri's book, it's somebody that just learned, that caring for other people and mentoring other people and, volunteering at charities. And, the first time she did it was, with a person in a wheelchair that may have had some mental health issues, and going from that and just being like, well, I've learned from that situation that while bad things have happened to me, I have to look at other people's lives as well, so I understand that there's a bigger world. I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I think that's very, very beautiful. Her ability to have levity is very powerful to me in her book, because I am trying to I've worked on my own memoir, and what happened was that that my memoir is really about being biracial in America, and how, I don't like being identified as African American, because, a lot of people say all biracial people are black. And I also talk about what it's like to be adopted into a homosexual family. And I also talk about what it's like to be adopted out of an abusive infancy, and also what it's like to deal with a lot of racism and inappropriate things that I've seen or happened to me, growing up and in college and all that stuff. But in my book, I'd really describe a lot of my parents' flaws, and I also really describe a lot of violence that I've seen all over the place. And one thing that I like about Juri's book that I take is that not everybody's the bad guy. And also, when you write a story about abuse and other very just messed up stuff, you really, really, really just need to remember the good people in your life, and also show some humility. Because I really feel like in my book, I kind of showed too much of a victim, and I've kind of showed almost like, almost just like my parents in a very cartoony way. In Juri Love's book, she does also talk about bringing music to people in Boston, like underprivileged youth, and starting a lot of different charities. And I really love the passages that she wrote, because they're very beautiful, and they also really talk about like how she really resonates with a lot of teenagers who were struggling. And I think that, and she also gives her advice on leadership. And I think that some things I take from this section is that, is like, first of all, like I found that really shocking when she said that, the person that got her involved in this said that, you're Japanese and you don't understand a lot about gangs. So, she had to do something else for a while. So I liked hearing that, because, there is very upfront racism towards people, or people are like, well, you're Japanese, you're from another culture, so you can't understand American things. It's the same thing too. Like, I'm biracial, and a lot of people consider me African American. So a lot of people in my life have kind of assumed that, like I've done a lot of writing, and a lot of people kind of assume that I should write about Black issues, and talk positively about the Black experience, when that's not who I want to be. So I like how that was said, because that is very powerful. And, obviously when she started to do a lot of nonprofits in Boston, this was the late 90s. So it was still a time where people were not extremely politically correct, and something like that, I said nowadays would be a very serious deal. There are some sections of the book where it does talk about how she helped a bunch of underprivileged youth who lost their fathers through gang violence, or friendly fire from gang violence. And there's this one passage about like this kid who lost his father, and he ended up having to, be the man of the house, and he defended his sisters through beating up somebody else, and he ended up in a juvenile hall program. And then there are a few other people too that, I think like, there was this kid who avoided eye contact, and then Juri and this kid like talked about their lives, and I think and there was kind of some resonance between both of them. So I like that, because it does kind of show the before and after, how these people have been, impacted by, charities and different programs. And I also like it because, it does talk about social issues. Like I never realized how big, gang violence was in Boston until I kind of read this book. And I also feel the other thing I love is that, she does talk about that struggle of, people making positive music because of the influence of gangsta rap, which was, very popular in the 1990s. So what a lot of people forget about gangsta rap is that, it talked about objectifying women, sexual content, a lot of drug content, violence, promoted a lot of swearing and ebonics, whereas she's also kind of met some people too who have, decided to not go that route, and they make really amazing music, and they've kind of inspired other people who are more into the gangster rap style to really just, explore different parts of themselves that are more positive. And I really like that because, again, I'm being biracial in America. When I write my book, I really would like to talk about how the gangster rap style had a bad influence among people who are biracial or African American because, it's definitely encouraged a huge generation of people to embrace, mediocrity and Black stereotypes. And it's also perpetuated a lot of negative stereotypes, but it's also encouraged people who were Black to follow, very bad role models, or really just not really embrace more individualism or intellectual individualism. So I think that's great that it's talked about. I will say that, I think I really love the character descriptions in her book. I think she describes characters very well. A lot of it is a lot of information, and sometimes it feels a lot like a summary, but I do understand that, if she kind of went into detail about a lot of things in her life, this book would be, 1,200 or 2,000 pages, something like the length of Les Miserables or twice that. So again, I think I like the consolidation that she does. In one section, Juri Love talks about her experience talking to counselors and getting treatment, dealing with sexual abuse, and just finding out what PTSD is and how that's also sabotaged her relationships. It's definitely a very hard and riveting chapter because she does talk about how she was married and then she got divorced, and it was something where she hurt that relationship because she was sleeping around with different men. And I also think it's really cool that, she takes accountability for it, but also it's very understandable when her counselor explained to her, how people with PTSD, especially sexual abuse, they suffer psychologically, sexually. So, and I've read a book called PTSD: A Love Story, where it's the same thing with a character that usually people who are victims of any type of PTSD or traumatic experiences, but definitely sexual traumatic experiences, they tend to just have sex in different ways. So I think in Juri's sense, wanting to feel powerful, wanting to feel in control, wanting to feel love. Obviously, somebody who's been sexually abused by a piece of shit father, usually you feel powerless, and also you don't feel love. You feel like an object. And so finding the opposite of that is how some people cope with it. Juri says in the section, which is, if you're a victim of sexual abuse or any type of inappropriate sexual behavior, it's really not your fault, and there's power in counseling, and there's also just really power in understanding how it's changed your mindset and it's made things difficult for you. And also it's made, feeling love difficult for you. And also sex is a very powerful feeling. And sex is it's very powerful for, because, most people do it to feel love. There are people who have sexual addictions and just the feeling it gives. And then some people like the physical feeling. Some people like the catharsis and dopamine feeling of sex. And I can kind of see how that all gets messed up when you are sexually abused or sexually harassed. And I don't even mind sharing that, there's been some things that have happened to me that were sexually inappropriate through my life. And I've also dealt with bullying and depression and just a lot of people just thinking that they can do whatever they want to me. And and definitely I've been somebody who, who has issues trying to connect with people, throwing all my emotions on certain people because I want to feel love. I want to just have a sense of security. So I can definitely relate to it. She really believes that leadership comes from building up other people, but also too that you don't undervalue and you don't stereotype. And sometimes people do come from problems, and people are damaged, and they need a bunch of chances to do better, and they do end up getting better. So part of having an impact on other people is really just is really seeing value in other people and just realizing that other people have problems, and some people are just people with problems who want to do better and better with their lives and want to break the cycle of self-destruction, either in their own lives or what happens in their community or what's been happening in their family for generations. So I think that, her ability to value other people is something very beautiful. And I think that that's also something that's a strength of this book. I like how in Juri's book, it does show how people do suffer from miscarriages and how there are people like who look at it as a life growing within their bodies. And there are also, and I have to break the stereotype, and there are men too who get a woman pregnant, and they're also devastated as men because of a miscarriage, So I like how she brings attention to that because, it's something that does happen. Obviously when a woman has a child, there are a lot of physiological changes. And sometimes, there are people with very sensitive bodies, so they end up losing blood and it ends up just doing damage to them, and ultimately there are people who walk away and give birth and then just feel like life is precious and beautiful because, it's something where they could have even lost their own lives giving a child. So it's definitely very interesting. It's definitely very interesting stuff, and it's definitely a very cool life perspective. So again, it is a great book because it does talk about different sides of life. And then also too, there are a lot of people who are very ignorant of what it feels like to deal with a miscarriage or how other people cope with a miscarriage or how other people feel about a miscarriage. So again, I like how Juri's book brings light to it. Juri appears on a Japanese interview show, and it's really cool because they ask her, what makes you such an overachiever, and she said that it did take her time to kind of realize why she feels that way and is a bit of an overachiever. And then she did say when it comes to PTSD, people have different ways of coping of it. Some people become heavy smokers. Some people get into drugs. Some people get into alcoholism is one of the signs. And there are people who engage in self-destructive behaviors. And sometimes people are overachievers. And I think she talks about being a little girl in the first grade. And what happens with parent-teacher conferences in Japan is that teachers come to their parents' home, and when she and her father were being interviewed by the teacher, her teacher was able to tell that there was something wrong because it was at the time that her mother left. So she kind of felt that all this overachieving was a way to not show weakness, not to show something was wrong. And also, she really lived in fear of her father's expectations. So, and also too, her father was very violent when she didn't do a good job. And I do understand that, back, Juri is 45 years old, I believe. But I do understand too that, even in America, 2 generations ago, if you didn't get good grades, parents would easily beat you because in some cultures, or even in American culture, parents always looked at that as you're shaming the family, you're not living up to your expectations, or you're embarrassing the family because you're getting low grades. So, she may. So I think like in her PTSD, it was a way for her to feel like she's covering up a lot of problems. She's showing that. She's showing like it helps her show a facade that everything is okay when she's suffering internally. So, that is kind of very powerful and sad. And I also will say, too, that, I think one beautiful and powerful interpretation of a theme that I get from this book is really just how there are people who are hard workers. There are people who stand out and are very achieved, but sometimes you don't know their backstory. And we can always let our inferiority, Napoleon complex, really tear down those people. But we ultimately just need to be very appreciative of those people, respect those people, and be nice to everybody, because sometimes we don't know what a person is going through. I really like what the book has to say about forgiveness. And what it says is that, sometimes we have to learn to forgive ourselves if we can't forgive the people that perpetrated us or abused us. As what happened, she'll never know what a functional father-daughter relationship is like. It put her through a lot of years of hell, and it's definitely been something that's caused her lifelong PTSD. So it's very unfortunate that, people just suggest that she forgives her father. And then the other thing is that, again, nobody really knows how deep and bad those feelings are that a person has. So it's a good piece of advice that she had, that you have to learn how to forgive yourself for not forgiving your abusers. And I think that that's extremely powerful, and that's a way to help a lot of people who have dealt with forms of abuse or sexual violence. Personally, one thing that's really hurt me in my life is that I found out that I was adopted out of an abusive situation. Like when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was neglected, and I was talked and just like really uncared for. And it's something that really just haunts and disturbs me. And then also I heard from my birth father, from my adopted father, that the reason why me and Matt were adopted was because somebody was driving by and they saw that my mother was beating my older brother with a Coca-Cola bottle. And then I got in touch with my adopted aunt, and she was asking me if my brother has a permanent scar from one of the beatings that our birth mother gave us when, she was like, when my brother was like 3 or 4 years old. And I've been told many times, and unfortunately some lies from my adopted parents, that my birth mother believed in me. She thought that I was special. And it really hurt me when I was 11 years old, and my adopted father was saying that, adults have problems too. We learn to forgive. And then also, I did grow up in a generation where if you do come from abusive parents, and also my adopted father, his dad walked out on him, all that was to teach you to crack the books, work really hard, persevere, start a family, and dismiss all the pain. You know what? They lived life badly, but, by God, it should motivate you. And I remember 11 years old, I was really sad about all that. And it really fucked me up for a lot of years. I went like decades without wanting to have a girlfriend or wanting to have a very functional relationship because of what happened or what my father shared. I've gone with situations where I've wanted to be alone and just really be buried in my work and my legacy over starting a family. I've been in situations too where, I'm biracial, and this is hard for me to say, but, I'm a majority white and I'm part African American, but I always like to be called white because of what my birth mother did. because it was a coping mechanism for me, and it's not right. Biracial is what I'm being identified as, but through my entire life, I hated being called black because I never wanted to be the race of my birth mother, and it was really painful. But I think that, it really sucked because, I remember one time in high school, my fucking adopted father, he was kind of like, well, when you talk to a therapist, you should not be talking about your birth mother and other things like that. You get over it. Why don't you talk about what it's like to be adopted by two gay men who love you? And, what does it mean? What does it mean? And that always really, really hurt me because my adopted fathers, they've never really have been sensitive to how I feel or how my pain hurts me. When you find out that your mother or when your birth mother, tried to kill you and neglected you and beat your older brother, and then she was a person that had kid after kid after kid, and she was abusive, tried to kill a couple of them, and then you kind of found out that she never had a kind word about you. She was just saying, well, you were I got in touch with my birth aunt, and she just said that my birth mother spent her life just saying things about me and my brother about we were just adopted by two white men, or the white men took away her kids and other stuff like that. And she continued being a prostitute and a heroin addict and a piece of shit. So it makes me really happy to find understanding in Juri's book because, there are some people you can never, ever forgive. And it makes me so mad. And it still makes me mad to this day that, my adopted parents are extremely ignorant to how I feel. And that attitude of just move on and act like your pain means nothing to you. That is very sad that my parents were ignorant like that. But I really think that, one thing I love about Juri's book is she does talk about the pain and how that really hurts like hell. The book concludes with Juri giving advice to different groups of people. And the first group she does is talk about people who are victims of sexual abuse, whether it be by family members or just people in general. And she just lifts us a lot of advice, you don't blame yourself. You have to learn to love yourself. And you also have to believe that even if people don't believe you, you still have to ask for help. And, what happened to you is true. And that's all very beautiful and powerful stuff because, there are a lot of people that blame themselves. And also there are people who are not believed. So, people just think that there's a lack of a support system. And I also feel I'm happy that she does mention that with Me Too has definitely had a really huge impact on making the world a better place and bringing light to these issues. However, places like Japan and even sometimes a bit in America, it's not where it needs to be. And I also like how she gives advice to people who do commit sexual crimes. She does say that, we're all put on this earth to be good and compassionate people. So, why would you do something like that? You have to rethink your life purpose. And that sometimes the people you end up hurting could actually be people who would want to love and help you in the long run. And also, the best thing to do is just to come forward and apologize and change how you live life. And I think that's also very powerful too, because, it is a sense of telling, very bad people to find ways to change themselves. And I think the other thing it does too is it says that some people who abuse people sexually are actually abusers themselves, who actually have gotten abused themselves. But she said there's still no excuse for that. So I really like it because that's something very powerful as well. And I think that in most books, where people talk about their sexual abuse or how they're abused by people, sometimes they don't tell people who are abusers, what they should do or suggestions on how they change themselves. And I think that it's good because, some people may come forward and be like, okay, well, this is what I've done in my past. So, I should just either, go to jail or just be like, okay, well, I did this and this is how I'm going to change it. I'm not going to be that person. So I think that's very powerful stuff. And then also too, she does talk about in another section about like, family members, like how families should really take abuse very seriously. And there is like a very huge percentage of people like who hear about stories of abuse that happen to children in their own families and just either don't take it seriously or don't believe it. And definitely in cultures like Japan, there's always a sense of, blood is thicker than water, so you protect your family members by not talking about these things. And then the other thing too is that sometimes like it's like you don't want to get your other family members in trouble, so people will just be like, okay, well, the kid has to get over it because I don't want to get my family member in trouble, or it's going to bring up a lot of bad feelings, so you just let it go. So those are things that should not really happen, because obviously when people say things like, there is sexual abuse, but we're going to say nothing happened just so it's water under the bridge, you don't realize the lifelong effects that you have on people. So overall, these are very important messages. The last thing that I want to say is that, overall, this is a very, very powerful book. And I like that it's around like 120 pages, because when you read the whole entire thing, it goes by very quickly. It's a very difficult read because of the subject matter. And I really think that I really like that because, again, if this was a book that was like 400, 500 pages talking about a really serious issue, it would either feel, like too much to read because it's just too heavy, or it would just feel like talked about so long that it may be a little desensitizing. So I think it's at a really good book length. And I also really feel that I like how Juri really articulates, and you find out towards the end of the book that a lot of her overachievement really does come from a coping mechanism of her PTSD. Because again, as I said, I think a central interpretation of this book that I got out of is that we can all look at people and we can feel jealous of their success, or we can have an interpretation of them and not really take in their backstory. And we can ultimately form our own prejudice that way. But when we do that, we end up missing the person. So you never know what a person goes through. So we should all treat each other better. And I think that that's the main theme. And I will say that as far as the writing goes, I think it's done very, very well. I really feel like it's Juri's style. I've read Matthew Della Pena's book, Mexican White Boy, and what he does in a lot of his chapters is that he would either have like a part 1, part 2, part 3 in each chapter, or he'll be like, okay, part 1, this part 1 is what happens to this character. Part 2 is what happens to another character. Part 3 is what happens to the main character in each chapter. So each chapter has like a different section. So it almost feels like an outline type of thing. So it's definitely a new style of writing. A lot of people like who traditional writers may consider that bad writing, because it's almost like saying, you're doing that to cover up. You're doing that you're doing that to overcompensate for not writing, something that's more cohesive, because all chapters should be written cohesively. But I think that, as I said, that writing, just like with art, has a very libre style now. So it's definitely something that we have to be very conscientious of. The other thing that I want to mention is that the other thing that I want to mention is that, I think one thing I did not like about this book is that, she does explain things a lot. Like, she kind of explained, what a katatsu is. She explains, like, what chazul is, and other things. And I kind of feel like, in my eyes, that's very, very bad writing, because I've learned either you show by examples, but you don't give definitions of stuff. I think even if it's a scientific word like chazuls, you really don't need to kind of explain that, and also the word chazul itself sounds kind of gross, but I think like I don't like definitions of words being explained because I think that it teaches people not to, get off their ass and use a dictionary or just like Google words and stuff like that. But I do understand that it's a controversial thing. Like I believe that, you shouldn't explain those things, but you shouldn't explain definitions of words. But also there are people like that go along and just offer definitions too. So it's something that I feel a little weird about. I do feel like, as a piece of literature, because she is a news reporter, that style is really incorporated in her nonfiction. So it's very simplistic writing. It's not like narrative driven like you would see in The Heart of Darkness or This Boy's Life, or it doesn't feel very like a point of view type of thing. It just feels like a news article. This is the situation. This is the people. This is what's going on. This is the morality we should learn from this situation. And then that kind of repeats in every chapter because it feels like it goes section for section to section. And I like that because that's just, Juri incorporating how she's learned to do writing within her nonfiction. And that makes strong writing because that way there's a sense of uniqueness. I think as I've have studied literature a lot more and read like hundreds of books in my life, from being somebody who was very ignorant about reading and researching, I'm happy that I kind of understand that and I've grown to kind of respect that more instead of just finding that a bit of kind of a detriment. So, I think everybody writes their story differently. So, overall, I think aesthetically it's a very, very good book. And like I said before, that I really, really hope that, this becomes a very, very popular book in Japan. And if it doesn't, I think that the book will not be as far reaching as it needs to be. But I think that, over time, there will be a Me Too movement and there will be a lot of talk of sexual violence and sexual harassment in Japan. And it's definitely going down that direction. But I think that hopefully this book will be a catalyst for it. The same way Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man was a catalyst for the civil rights movement. And Uncle Tom's Cabin was a catalyst for a lot of issues that are going on in China nowadays. So, and also, James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time was a catalyst for the Black Lives Matters movement. So I really, really just hope that this book becomes very far-reaching. And I also really hope that, for people who are ignorant, they read this book and really understand that it's not, Juri saying I celebrate myself. This is somebody who suffers really, really deeply, who's still affected by PTSD and her own psychobiology, her own psychoanalytical biology, her psychoidiosyncrasies are all kind of formed by what happened to her. I think there's a famous psychotheorist who said nature versus nurture, and how conditions in life, set up your brain. So, and it's true for Juri. So, I think that this is a very powerful book, and it really does teach the power of understanding. And I think that that's the main message I get from this book is like the power of understanding, the power of being a kinder person, and the power of also, too, that, we understand like people who are abused and deal with sexual harassment and other issues very, very seriously. And then also, too, that people who are abusers, you should really complete clean, confess your sins, and then work hard on just not doing the same thing and then actually being a fighter against abuse and other very serious issues. And just because you were abused in life does not mean you turn into another generation of abusers. So I think this is a very powerful and beautiful book. It's very life-changing, and this book has really inspired me to have a lot more empathy and understanding of other people, because I feel like we definitely need more of that. And definitely in a very fast-paced world, in a world where people are very focused on themselves because of social media, it definitely is very, very challenging, but it's also stuff that we have to consider. We need to fight harder and harder to make the world a better place. And part of it does come from may the peace passive with understanding. That's a line from The Wasteland, but may peace pass with understanding is a very powerful thing. Because the more we understand people, communication is the thing that kills ignorance and a lot of pain within this world.